Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is July 11th, 2016, and we are back on UCY. The show has been off the air for the last 2 weeks, and we apologize for that. A lot has happened in the last 2 weeks, and we haven't been able to cover it due to logistical issues, but we are back now. The show wasn't really even on hiatus. It was just impossible to record at the time, so we're going to try to remedy that in the future. But for now, we're back, and we have quite a backlog of information that we need to take a look at. We've had a major series of escalations on the domestic front in the last few weeks, well, in the last few days, rather, with the police shootings, with the police shootings and the police being shot, I guess we should say, here in the United States. And we're seeing an escalation of that. We're also seeing the deterioration of the foreign policy front on a number of different areas, right? The Syrian, Middle Eastern front, the Asian front, and a few others. There's some positive news in all of this, and we'll get to that as much as we can. But I guess we should discuss the most important issues first. Before we do, I want to remind you to catch Truth on the Tracks every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UCY.TV. And you can catch the show. It's being rebroadcast. Just go to UCY.TV and check the schedule and look for Truth on the Tracks. You can see when it's rebroadcast. Or you can listen to the archive of the show at UCY.TV/TT for Truth on the Tracks. Now, if you're interested in my work, obviously you can go to activistpost.com, arrowofwisdom.org, and naturalblaze.com. Those are the websites that I write for on a regular basis. But if you're interested in my work specifically, I encourage you to go to brandonturbeville.com. That is the website where I repost all of my articles, all of the YouTube videos, all of the archive versions of this show, and all the all the books are available there as well. There's an events page on when I do speaking events and so forth. It's all there. Contact information is there as well. Now, we have to look at some domestic issues first. We have 2 police shootings, one in Minnesota and one in Baton Rouge, and they occurred within hours, I guess, of each other. One of them more clear-cut than the other. In Minnesota, we have a concealed carrier being pulled over for a traffic violation. His girlfriend is live streaming the interaction with the police, and the concealed carrier, whose name is Philando Castile, or was Philando Castile, he informed the police officer that he was a concealed carrier and that he had a weapon in the car. This is normal procedure. This is what you do as a concealed carrier. Typically, the police aren't supposed to piss themselves and kill you, but this is I guess what happened. He informed the cop that he had a concealed carry license and that he had a weapon in the car. The cop says he told him to keep his hands where they were. The girlfriend says no. He said, "Show me your ID," and obviously he reached for his ID. The cop shot him. You see all this on YouTube, right? You can see it on YouTube and a number of other outlets where Castile was shot. The girlfriend apparently thinks that he's shot in the arm, but she thinks that that's the extent of his injuries. But apparently, maybe the bullet went through or something. The guy dies essentially on screen, and you can watch that. Now, of course, the cop lovers, the Americans who have not given up their love affair with law enforcement and the police in general are trying to defend this and say, never, if the cop thinks you're reaching for a gun, he was justified. Well, I'm sorry. The cop made, if this was a mistake, the cop made a mistake and he was wrong. And nobody else gets to get away, I guess, besides Hillary Clinton, with making the wrong decision where lives are at stake. Now, they're trying to justify this and say that he shouldn't have moved his arm in a way that made it look like he was going to reach for a gun. Well, moving your arm in a way that the cop doesn't like is not grounds for execution, ladies and gentlemen. How did we deal in society? How did police deal in society before the last 10 years, 15 years, when they started murdering people left and right? How did we deal in society with people who moved their arms in specific ways without killing them? Did we survive prior to this time here? Of course we did, because there was a different atmosphere, different training, different kind of individual who was being hired, not low IQ, psychopathic, violence-loving bullies that are being recruited intentionally for police forces to do just this type of thing. Now, we have a killing in Baton Rouge. And by the way, we condemn the killing of Philando Castile, and I call on all the gun organizations in the country right now to condemn that killing. He was a concealed carrier. He was abiding by the law, and he did not deserve to be treated in this way. He didn't deserve to be killed. And so I call on all the gun organizations who are typically silent when it comes to police brutality, because they are catering to the Republican conservative crowds, and that's unfortunate. Gun organizations should not be catering to Republicans or conservatives. They should be catering to people who are interested in gun rights, and let the chips fall where they may. But this now affects everybody, right? If you're a conservative, if you're a Republican, if you're black, if you're white, this is something that affects all of you. If you're a gun owner, if you have a concealed carry permit, does this not show that your life is now in danger if you are in any way interacting with the police? So come on, gun organizations, let's call on the police. Let's condemn this killing, and do so in unison. And if you're smart, that will bring more attention to your organization and do something to repair the damage that's been done to it for years of catering to the Republican Party. And of course, we wholly support gun rights here. This is now more a time to exercise gun rights than ever, and we should definitely do so. Of course, now the media is making this a race issue. Remember, it's not Sterling, but Castile, a black man shot by a white officer. Only the officer wasn't white; he was Latino. So now now that's falling away in favor of the Baton Rouge shootings, where the officers were indeed white. And that is, of course, more opportune for the media to jump on in terms of black man killed by white officers. And we now have protests coming from the Alton Sterling. There is some question in this shooting. There are two police officers that have Sterling down. Apparently, he was turned in by a homeless person. Sterling was selling CDs outside of a convenience store, and a homeless person claims, and this is alleged, right, that this homeless person came up and asked him for money, and that he showed them a gun and said, "Get away from me, I told you to leave me alone." Well, you can infer many things from that on other sides. We don't know, and of course we don't know really about the call. But what we see in the video is two officers wrestling Sterling to the ground, and yeah, okay, there's question: is he reaching for a gun or not? One cop screams, "He's got a gun! He's got a gun!" The other cop screams, "If you move, I swear to God." And the inference here is that he is going to shoot him if he moves. Now, the media, of course, is hyping this as a racial issue, as they do every time, and the average American dope is falling right in line with it and making it into a racial issue. We're not going to get into the discussion of whether or not this is a racial issue, because we can talk statistics, we can do all kinds of things, and we can battle that out over and over and over. But the important thing here is the issue of police killing citizens. Police have killed so many American citizens. More American citizens have been killed by police in the last 10 years than American soldiers killed in Iraq, and that is indicative of a major, major problem. Now, we need to address the shooting in Dallas, too, because this is extremely important. The name of the shooter in Dallas, we have 5 police shot. There was a protest, and there's many facets here. There's a protest in Dallas over the police brutality, and again, it's all centering around Alton Sterling because the race issue could not be fully exploited in Minnesota because the cop wasn't the right race. He was Latino. So, and the goal here is apparently to make whites and blacks fight and kill one another. So we have that falling off the radar. And now the Alton Sterling shooting, in which there is more question, there's more room for debate. So therefore, while blacks automatically will support Alton Sterling, we'll now see many whites joining the side of the police, unfortunately, because there's room for question. And the media has so terrified one race group of the other that there are now these sort of polarizations that are taking place, and there's a lack of rational thinking, and there's a lack of reasoning that's taking place. The issue should not matter whether the victim is black. The issue should matter whether or not this individual was a threat, whether or not he was unjustly killed. Whatever you think about races, to have some self-preservation, right? If you don't like people of the opposite race, at least have some self-preservation and realize that if it happens to them, that one day it will come around to you, and that there is nobody that's going to be left to stand up for you if you keep your mouth shut now. And that's why it's so important to speak out about these kind of things, to have some enlightened mutual self-interest, if nothing else. If nothing else in terms of just basic morality. Now, this shooting in Dallas, this is very interesting, right? We have a protest, and we have Black Lives Matter, a notoriously racist hate group that is violent. No love lost for Black Lives Matter here. I want nothing to do with them. I've criticized them on a number of occasions, funded by George Soros. This is a Fed operation, if you could ever see one, and it's made up of some nasty elements. Now, the shooting itself, in which 5 police were shot, right? There's a number of questions of what this could be, right? Was this shooting completely organized by intelligence agencies? Was it actual chaos? Was it a combination of the two? Or was this something else entirely, right? We have gunmen ambushing police during protests. Let's look at one option, right? Let's look at the controlled option. We have this shooter. Now, this is the guy that's being zeroed in as the suspect, right? Micah Xavier Johnson. He was a former soldier, and they're now claiming, he trained at self-defense classes. Of course. Now that's on target for something. So we have this one guy. Now remember, early on there were reports of numerous shooters here, and these shooters were apparently in front of the police, beside the police, behind the police, and that's how they were able to take them out. Now all of a sudden it's one guy who was conveniently killed. He was holed up in this building, and they sent in a bomb robot to go in and blow itself up and kill him. So now what is that? Is that not an execution? They had him surrounded. The idea, of course, the smart idea would be to make sure that this guy was taken alive if possible, and then interrogated to find out if this was going to happen again. Now, he was not interrogated, most certainly. They sent in a bomb robot to get suicide bombing, essentially, for the robot. in order to do away with this guy. This was no intention of taking him alive. This was an intention of killing him. So was that the intention of completely erasing the ability of that person to spill the beans if he was indeed arrested in any way? Now, keep in mind, this is exactly what we saw in Syria when all this chaos started taking place there. We saw some protests about police brutality, and then there were some other protests that sprung up as a result of U.S.-backed destabilization. But immediately, as soon as those protests started taking place, there were snipers. And who were they targeting? They were targeting security forces in order to get the security forces to shoot back and to crack down. That's exactly what we saw. We all know where Syria is today. So is that the goal for the United States? And that is a reasonable question to ask. Now, that's one possibility. There's also the possibility that this was real, because you can only push people so far before they start to respond. The police, the United States is an authoritarian country. You can call it free, you can call it democratic, you can call it the greatest place in the world, all you want, but it's authoritarian. It may be the greatest place, but it's still authoritarian, and there's no real debating that now. And you can only push people so far with police brutality, with constant killings, with beatings and dehumanizations and disrespect at every opportunity, and barking orders at them like they're animals, before they've had enough and they start to respond. So is that actually what we're seeing? And the question is somewhat open, right? It could be that this was an operation. It could be that it was real. We're going to look into that in the future, and we're going to see. This is important. This is important stuff, because what we see in the mainstream media representation of this issue is that they are indeed making it a racial issue, and it is of course polarizing whites and blacks, and of course the hatred of the police really exists on both sides. Anybody who's ever had to deal with them knows. You can always tell the people who are so in favor of the police brutality generally are a little more able to evade police, shall we say, and a little more privileged existence. Maybe they don't have to deal with this type of brutality on a regular basis, and that's why they're able to justify it. But they're turning this into a racial issue, and you have to, and it's making average America choose. Do you want the Black Lives Matter fanatics, Black Lives Matter racists, and scum, or do you want the oppressive police scum that are nothing but bullies and murderers and just absolute filth? Which one do you want? Well, I choose neither. I don't want Black Lives Matter, and I don't want authoritarian police. So, but the average American, of course, is going to be terrified of one or the other. The average white American is going to be terrified of the racist Black Lives Matter. The average black American is, of course, going to be terrified of the police. There's going to be some play in between. And then, of course, it's so easy to stir people up in racial tension in the United States, because it's always there underneath the surface. And one of the reasons it's always there is because we're always talking about it. And one of the reasons that it's there is that the media, because the only thing that unites us in the United States is the television, and that's something we're all glued to. The media tells us what's the issue for today. I would ask you this, if you're watching the Alton Sterling protest, the Alton Sterling story, how many people are killed by police every year? Why all of a sudden did the mainstream media start reporting Alton Sterling? We're not saying they shouldn't. We're just saying that it's funny, because many people are killed by the police every year, and they don't get their stories on national media. And this is the same question you can ask about Michael Brown, right? Why was this on TV? They didn't say anything about other people. You want to look at black people killed by police? Okay, fine, you can do that. Why wasn't there others? Right? We have the guy in New York who was killed for selling cigarettes. That was a case of murder, right? There are more cases that take place than this. They don't get national media coverage. There's an agenda here, and you have to pay attention to this type of thing. So we're going to be watching this. Social unrest does seem to be coming to the United States, and it's something that people need to be prepared for. So I would suggest to the listeners, A, don't panic. It's time to inform yourself and get active, because we only have a short window of opportunity to do things. Get out and start giving demands. And I'm going to mention a set of demands that I put up on my website recently. But so don't panic. This is Rahm Emanuel says, never let a good crisis go to waste. Okay, well, we have a series of crises in the United States today, and it's time to not let them go to waste, and to at least take advantage of them and insert some demands for people who are angry, so that these movements don't simply burn out and lose steam, but they actually have clear direction and something that they could something that they could latch on to and actually demand. Now, also, I would suggest some level of preparation. Right? This is not to be a panic. This is not to scare you. I'm not selling anything here on this site or on this show. But particularly if you're in a city, but anywhere else also, this might be a time to look at arming yourself, getting some ammunition, getting some food, getting some storable water, etc. This might be the time to start thinking about that. And again, this is not cause for panic. This is just common sense. You need to make sure you have these things even if you do have to do it on a gradual basis, just to have these things to be more secure in your own environment. And I highly encourage you to do that now. It's time to look at doing that. But we have to get active. We can't just let this opportunity go by. Now, I've finally posted a list of demands on my website, and this is something I wanted to mention. It's called A Real New Deal for America, 43 points. And I wanted to put this up, especially now. I built it up enough, and I wanted to put it out so that we would have the opportunity. We've got the elections. We've got the conventions coming up soon. There's going to be more chaos there. We've got now these shootings, these chaos involved with the shootings, and we've got. It's also interesting that these stories and the protests were timed right at the turn of the political conventions, which themselves are supposed to be frantic and potentially even violent at the conventions. And then, of course, right at the same time as the movie The Purge is released. Isn't that interesting? But now we have 43 points. BrandonTurbeville.com. Please go there and check out these points. We want to have a series of demands. They're on the website now, and we're going to try to get them posted where they're tagged somewhere up top. But go look for the article, and that's going to be something that we want to use, right? This is something, you want to have a protest movement. You've got to have something to demand in order to have a protest movement, all right? And to go through some of these, I don't know if we want to go through all of this right now, but we will at some point in the future. We've done this over and over. Maybe we'll come back to it later on in the show if we have time, because I want to talk about some other issues. Now, I want to kind of move over to the domestic, to the foreign policy front, but I want to address this video that's been going around the internet for some time, for a few weeks. It's by AJ Plus, which, if you don't know, is Al Jazeera Plus, the Qatari-owned media organization. Remember, Qatar is the Gulf state feudal monarchy that is helping fund Al-Qaeda monkeys in Syria to destroy civilized people. This is an organization that for some reason many American leftists believe is giving them some type of radical information. And this is particularly why. This type of thing is particularly why. We have a video, Amaryllis Fox. She's is making the circuit on the internet. She's a former CIA clandestine services officer, where she says she's speaking out against the manner in which the war on terror is prosecuted and portrayed to the American public. And this video has been shared, it's been discussed thousands of times, particularly within the alternative media community, as evidence that the war on terror is just a big snowball of bad decisions and blowback. We've got ourselves into a situation that we have to get out of, and we're all just in this big snowball of confusion, of course, is what they're arguing. She makes a number of claims during that 3-minute clip, because it's conveniently only 3 minutes long, so you don't lose the attention span of most Americans. And it goes from the reasonable to the absurd, right? And we have alternative media outlets are just hailing this woman's video as brave. They're hailing her as a whistleblower. But we've got to analyze the statements that she makes for what they are, as opposed to just praising them because they seem to be anti-establishment in some way. Now, she makes a surprising amount of claims for about 3 minutes, and she manages to conflate issues, she conflates concepts, she conflates people in a really cleverly designed monologue that's clearly scripted for effect. If you haven't seen the video, go watch it. And you see that this woman is clearly had this thing scripted. There's a bit of acting to make it look like she's extremely pensive. I'm sorry, I know acting when I see it, and this is what it is. This is what she says. Okay, if I learned one lesson from my time with the CIA, it is this: everybody believes they are the good guy. I was an officer with the CIA clandestine service and worked undercover on counterterrorism and intelligence all around the world for almost 10 years. The conversation that's going on in the United States right now about ISIS and the United States overseas is more oversimplified than ever, end quote. Okay, fair enough. Lower-level agents of the CIA and lower-level fighters and terrorist organizations, or even, and obviously national militaries, believe they're the good guys. Sure. The propaganda surrounding the war on terror is oversimplified. Sure, all that's true, indeed. But she moves from information that's easily verified, like the statements that we just read, to much more questionable claims. So this is another one of her claims. Ask most Americans whether ISIS poses an existential threat to this country, and they'll say yes. That's where the conversation stops. If you're walking down the street in Iraq or Syria and ask anybody why America dropped bombs, you get, they were waging a war on Islam. And you walk in America and you ask why we were attacked on 9/11, and you get, they hate us because we're free. Those are stories manufactured by a really small number of people on both sides who amass a great deal of power and wealth by convincing the rest of us to keep killing each other, end quote. Okay, now she's correct on the latter part of her statement. She's correct that these are stories that are manufactured by a really small number of people on both sides who amass a great deal of power and wealth by convincing the rest of us to keep killing each other. That's true. Much of these stories really are manufactured by a small number of people to drum up support for foreign invasions and a police state back home. But who exactly is Fox talking to on the streets of Syria and Iraq that would say that a war on Islam is the reason the United States dropped bombs on their country? It certainly isn't the average Syrian like she tries to portray it. In fact, if you go to the average Syrian on the street and ask, why is America dropping bombs? The answer would almost always be centered around Israel in some capacity. Almost every researcher who focuses on Syria or Iraq is aware of this. But not one time in Fox's interview was Israel mentioned. The word wasn't even spoken. The war on Islam line is typically reserved only for the more fanatical religious zealots that make up the so-called opposition. So what's Fox suggesting? Is she suggesting that the average Syrian holds the same belief as the average Al-Qaeda fighter? Well, that's exactly what she's doing. Regardless of whether or not she states it explicitly, that's what she's doing. So I want to read another part of her quote. I think the question we need to be asking as Americans examining our foreign policy is whether or not we are pouring kerosene on a candle. The only real way to disarm your enemy is to listen to them. If you hear them out, if you're brave enough to really listen to their story, you can see that more often than not, you might have made some of the same choices if you'd lived their life instead of yours. An Al-Qaeda fighter made a good point during a debriefing. He said that all these movies that America makes, like Independence Day and Hunger Games and Star Wars, they're all about a small, scrappy band of rebels who will do anything in their power with the limited resources available to them to expel an outside, technologically advanced invader. And what you don't realize, he said, is that to us, to the rest of the world, you are the Empire and we are Luke and Han. You are the aliens and we are Will Smith. End quote. Now, what can we say here? Aside from pointing out that you don't debrief Al-Qaeda fighters, you interrogate them. Debriefing is reserved for CIA assets. We'll also mention that Fox is implying that there's a fundamentalist Al-Qaeda problem before America's foreign policy was formed. Right? In other words, that the problem existed and the United States perhaps acted rashly in dealing with it or made it worse. But the fact is that Al-Qaeda issue never would have existed in the first place had the United States not invented it. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, all these other related terrorist organizations are entirely creations of the United States government and the NATO apparatus. So while Fox, we might be able to forgive her for not knowing that little detail, being lower level, perhaps, not knowing the difference between a fundamentalist Al-Qaeda fanatic and an average Syrian is not excusable. That is assuming that the mistake is actually a mistake and not an intentional attempt to mislead the audience, which I believe that it probably is. She provides a number of questionable analogies. Remember when she discusses the Al-Qaeda fighter's interpretation of the Hollywood movies. If the fighter was so convinced that the U.S. is the empire, okay, fair point, the U.S. is the empire in that analogy, and that Al-Qaeda is the equivalent of Luke and Han, why did Al-Qaeda attack the Syrian government? Why did they attack the Iraqi government? Why did they attack the Libyan government? Okay, so this would be the equivalent of Luke and Han attacking the Galactic Republic while claiming to fight the Empire. It does not make any sense. So we can continue with the Star Wars analogy. We would have Saddam Hussein, Bashar al-Assad, and Muammar Gaddafi representing the Republic, and their militaries, along with Iraq's so-called insurgents fighting back against the U.S., they would be the rebels. Now, Fox should know this very well, but she conflates all this. Now, this is what she says. Last quote from her. But the truth is, when you talk to the people who are really fighting on the ground on both sides and ask them why they're there, they answer with hopes for their children, specific policies that they think are cruel or unfair. And while it may be easier to dismiss your enemy as evil, hearing them out on policy concerns is actually an amazing thing. Because as long as your enemy is a subhuman psychopath that's going to attack you no matter what you do, this never ends. But if your enemy is a policy, however complicated, that we can work with. End quote. So, all right, again, the question is, who is Fox actually talking about? When she references the people who are really fighting on the ground on both sides, does she mean the U.S. forces and terrorists versus the Syrian military? Does she exclude the U.S. military and just make it the Syrian military versus U.S. forces? Does she mean the Syrian military versus the NATO apparatus? We don't know, because her statements don't do anything to clarify the reality on the ground. They only serve to confuse it. So one good question for Fox would be how the how the Syrian government should listen to and hear out a so-called policy coming from an organization that crucifies women, beheads heretics, wants to impose Sharia law on a civilized people, in other words, that would crucify her just for looking the way she does in that video, how is Syria supposed to listen to that policy? How should Syria just listen to the concerns of the United States after the United States has funded those subhuman psychopaths? And yes, it's a damn accurate description for the so-called rebels. They're subhuman psychopaths. Absolutely. How is Syria supposed to hear out their policy when their policy is one of crucifixions and Sharia law? Is it possible that the policy of the United States and its proxy terrorists is just simply wrong and yes, subhuman? Is it possible that the other sides might not be so willing to have a couples therapy session? Well, she makes a number of good points regarding the fact that the narrative surrounding Al-Qaeda and the situation in Syria and Iraq is manufactured by the small number of people in high places. But she makes an incredibly wrong description of the conflict. She equates average Syrians and average Iraqis with jihadists in terms of their mindset and suggests that the upsurge of terrorism is a result of blowback as opposed to outright funding and conceit to overthrow sovereign states in search of world hegemony. Her statements serve to continue to drag Americans off into the abyss of misinformation surrounding the crisis in the Middle East, while she claims to do otherwise. And after watching that video, notably produced by AJ Plus, we can safely say that she's either misinformed herself or just simply good at her job. And that if you want to watch that video, it's just type in YouTube Amaryllis Fox. It has a number of views, so you'll be able to find it. Now, we want to talk about a number of other issues if we can. We want to mention briefly this chemical weapons issue that took place in mid-June, I think on June 16th. I may have the date wrong, but it's around June 16th. It was 3 years after this infamous Ghouta chemical weapons attack that was launched by Western-backed terrorists but blamed on the Syrian government by the Western mainstream media outlets. We have yet another possible chemical weapons attack in Ghouta. And we have, according to a Syrian military source cited by Al-Masdar, rebels in Damascus used these crudely assembled chemical bombs to attack Syrian soldiers with nerve gas in Ghouta. This is what the source says. Several soldiers suffered breathing difficulties after the attack and were immediately taken to a military hospital. Thankfully, all of them now in stable conditions. End quote. We've got a video that has come out of Syria that reportedly shows Syrian soldiers suffering the effects of the gas and undergoing treatment. The attack took place after 4 days of intense fighting between rebels and the Syrian military, where the military managed to reclaim territory from the Islamists. And who was responsible for this? We have Jaish al-Islam, a terrorist group that's backed by the United States and NATO. They are denying using the chemical weapons. They've instead claimed that the Syrian government was the perpetrator. That can be easily dismissed. But we still have both sides claiming that the other side was using the chemical weapons. It's clear that the attack, well, I should say it's clear, it does appear that the attack did take place. The video evidence that was produced by Sana News, the Syrian news agency, tends to lead credence to the claims that the Syrian government is making regarding that the Jaish al-Islam is the responsible party. Remember, in 2013, we had chemical weapons attacks being blamed on the Assad government by the United States and the NATO apparatus, despite evidence that it was actually the terrorist proxy forces that committed the attack. It stands as one of the most intense moments in the Syrian crisis, if you'll remember, because the United States was preparing to launch a Libya-style invasion before the Russians stepped in and mediated a diplomatic solution that resulted in Syria surrendering its chemical weapons stockpile. Terrorists in Syria, backed by the West, have used chemical weapons on a number of occasions, even televising proof of their possession of the chemicals and the manufacturing capability needed to produce them. We can find that on the web. And there's never been any credible evidence to suggest that the Syrian military has used chemical weapons against either civilians or combatants, just to drive that point home. Now, we've also, in late June, we have this escalation. It seems like every day the U.S. and NATO insist on continuing the destabilization of Syria, and that every day that they do that is a day closer to some potential cataclysmic confrontation between the Western powers and Russia. And Russia has shown considerable restraint. NATO's attempted to push Russia as far as it can without going quite over the line, but the world is rapidly approaching a situation where one misstep could result in not only regional but worldwide conflict. And we almost had that situation occur on June 20th when Russian and American jets came dangerously close to combat over Syria during the course of a Russian bombing campaign against the terrorists in the Al-Tanf area near the Jordanian border. There was a mid-air confrontation, according to the Daily Mail, from the FA-18 fighters, which were scrambled by the Pentagon, and several Su-34s, which is Moscow's most advanced bombers. The Russian jets had struck a garrison of Syrian death squad fighters during a fight against the Islamic State in Al-Tanf. And the Russian military is, of course, not denying the bombing raid. The bombing raid did happen, but it's denying that it targeted Western-backed terrorists, meaning terrorists publicly claimed by the United States, which is making the argument that the United States did not make the positions of the proxy terrorists known to the Russian Air Force. We have Major General Igor Konashenkov of the Russian military. He's the spokesman for the Russian Defense Ministry. He claimed that the strike was more than 300 kilometers away from the areas the U.S. had designated as being controlled by legitimate opposition forces. There's a lengthy description of the standoff by the Newsweek, the Daily Beast, Snoozweek. We won't go into the detailed description. This has already passed, but there was a video conference that took place, but nobody elaborated on the specifics of the discussion. The Russian Defense Ministry did respond publicly to the situation. Konashenkov says, quote, "The Russian Defense Ministry has been offering its American colleagues for the past few months to draw up a unified map that will contain relevant information on the location of forces active in Syria. However, we have been unable so far to make any significant progress in this issue," end quote. So it's just one more incident in a series of standoffs between the U.S. and Russia. Russians, of course, being the only party that's acting legally in the context of the crisis. And if the U.S. and NATO and Israel and the GCC don't soon abandon their plans to destroy and destabilize Syria, these incidents may reach a point where cooler heads no longer prevail, and an itchy trigger finger might ignite much of the world in some type of conflagration. So with that, we have not even a week before the standoff, we had the U.S. speaking via the war criminal and Skull and Bones member John Kerry, warning the Russians and the Iranians and the Syrians that the U.S. patience is not infinite. Of course, Kerry's comments were more directly aimed at Russia, but this is what Kerry said. He says, "Russia needs to understand that our patience is not infinite. In fact, it is very limited with whether or not Bashar al-Assad is going to be held accountable," end quote. Well, an interesting point to make is that since the entire crisis in Syria was the handiwork of the U.S., perhaps Kerry means patience with obstructing U.S. plans for the destruction of Syria. Russia is now warning the U.S. that it is running out of patience too, and this is head of the Russian General Staff Valery Gerasimov told reporters, quote, it is us, not Americans, who are losing patience concerning the situation in Syria. We are fully meeting our commitments and agreements on securing the ceasefire and national reconciliation in Syria," end quote. He also claimed that Russia had been sending coordinates of Russian bombing targets, but said that the U.S. Would not determine or would not tell them which groups were moderate terrorists and which were extremist terrorists by U.S. rhetoric. He says, as a result, terrorists are actively restoring their strength and the situation is escalating again. So we have we have that as well. Now, since we were discussing the situation in Dallas, I feel like we need to mention this situation in New York, because I just want to drive this point home about how instances can be made to be more than they are, and how the fear meter of the U.S. can be driven up to severe within a few seconds, and then just completely disappear off the radar. We had a flurry of mainstream media reports coming to us on June 21st. Okay, this is not necessarily a big issue. I want to illustrate something here. Flurry of mainstream media reports regarding 3 people who were arrested in New Jersey over the possession of firearms and firearms-related material. Now, if you were to pay attention to the mainstream press, which you really shouldn't be doing, you would have read those stories and you would have believed that ISIS had triggered yet another one of its sleeper cells and only narrowly stopped before committing a massive terror attack in the New York, New Jersey, Holland Tunnel. This has occurred shortly after the Orlando shooting. But the reality of the situation is that 3 people were driving through the area with weapons in their vehicle. They had drugs and a cracked windshield. Let's look at the report by Philip Messing of the New York Post. This is how he reported the story without the hype of many of the other news agencies. Quote, 3 people were busted Tuesday with a cache of firearms, ammunition, and body armor at the Holland Tunnel, law enforcement sources said. Cops at the New Jersey entrance of the tunnel stopped a pickup truck with 3 Pennsylvania residents in it for a cracked windshield, Port Authority sources told the Post. After spotting a gun, cops searched the vehicle and uncovered loaded weapons, about 2,000 rounds of ammunition, and ballistic vests, sources said. NBC News said the 3 people were 2 men in their 50s and a 20-something woman. Their weapons cache also included a camouflage helmet and night goggles, NBC reported. Then look at RT. The Joint Terrorism Task Force is assisting in the investigation, a source told NBC4. However, law enforcement officials told the network that the 3 suspects are gun enthusiasts and that there is no terror threat. Investigators are looking into whether the suspects were planning to shoot a rival drug dealer, the source said, end quote. All right, so Messing of the New York Post notably avoided the hype of the other reports, but the real question is, why is this story even being reported to begin with? At this point, we have a relatively routine situation that's not cause for alarm, right? We have 3 adults traveling in a truck together with firearms, which they have a right to own and travel with. They have body armor, which is legal in some contexts, but many, including myself, would argue should not be solely reserved for special people in special uniforms. And of course, they had drugs in the vehicle, which again, many people, including myself, would argue should never be a cause for arrest to begin with. So why were they pulled over and searched? They had a cracked windshield. So are you frightened yet? They had a cracked windshield, America. Move over, ISIS. These people were armed. They possessed arbitrarily banned substances, and they had a cracked windshield. So why the hype in the media? Right? After all this, the case is scarcely cause for concern and panic, unless, of course, you are concerned and panicking for your rights to own guns, make personal choices for yourself, and travel. Then it is indeed time to panic. But the reason why the mainstream press leapt on the story like this is because an all-out war has been declared on the Second Amendment in the United States. An all-out war has been declared on the minds of the American public and what's left of them. The media is not worried that most people who read the story will realize that they should have been doing something else with their time, because most people simply won't read the story to begin with. They'll see the headline, which is 3 armed suspects found and arrested in New York Holland Tunnel, and they'll immediately transpose that headline with something in their own minds to be something like ISIS tried to blow up the Holland Tunnel, or ISIS had easy access to guns. For those who are a little more interested in the affairs of the world, the right will translate the report to mean Muslims, and the left will translate it to mean racists. Right? So at this point, successful indoctrination has been achieved, and the public just needs to be prodded with the right headline to move them in the desired direction, which oligarchs want to see them go. A little fear goes a long way with a population that's terrorized by its own government and media and terrorized in overdrive since 9/11, and a generation of Americans who are now growing up that know nothing else but constant fear, terrorism, and radicalizations. And there we have it. When there's no domestic terror to capitalize on, there almost never has been, the FBI, the CIA, the shadow government, they'll create it, like they did in 9/11, in New York, Oklahoma City, Orlando, Boston, Portland, and go on and on. When the intelligence apparatus is lagging behind on the physical terror assembly line, the media simply will step in to make something out of nothing and reinforce the indoctrination the Americans have been receiving at an ever-increasing rate since 9/11. So it's terrorism ex nihilo from the mainstream media. Now, we're coming up on the end of the show. I want to let everybody know that if you have any friends in Iran or Turkey, there are some translations of my interview with Khorasan News with Ali Kaimi. This English version is found on my website and the Khorasan News website. It's an Iranian news website, and there are Turkish translations of my work now available on the website as well. It's posted right there on the homepage. At some point we may, if this continues to become more of a regular thing, we're going to have to figure out something else to do in terms of where we post them. But right now I would encourage you to go there. If you read in those languages, share them, and of course the translations are always available. Now, I want to mention some other articles if I can. We have the European Union. We didn't even mention the Brexit. Okay, before I get to the EU and the question of glyphosate and Monsanto, I would like to congratulate the British people on exiting the new European Soviet of the European Union. It was actual. You made the right decision in England. You should have exited, and you did. You didn't listen to the propaganda of the media telling everyone that you were a racist if you wanted out of the European Union, that you were a neo-Nazi if you wanted out of the European Union, and if you were, I don't know, ISIS members or people eaters from Mars if you wanted out of the European Union. I guess the propaganda didn't work this time. Now, we are aware that the Wall Street bankers, the City of London bankers, were prepared for this, and we are aware that this is not a shot to the heart that a lot of people might think that it is to the oligarchs. But it is a step in the right direction, and Britain showed that it can indeed pull out of the European Union, and it sent a message to other countries. Listen up, Greece, Portugal, Spain, Ireland. You guys can come out of the European Union. This would be a great idea. You don't need it. It's not benefited you in any way. So get out of there. Break this thing up. It's not democratic. It's Sovietized. It's got to go. This is very different cultures that don't need to be smashed in on one another. This is not productive in any way. So good for the Brexit. We support the Brexit. Now we call on the British people to mobilize and do something else historical, right? You take a look at the 43 points I posted on my website. Latch on to one of those and be historical once again, and you can lead Europe. Europe needs a leader, so that's what you need to do. The issue with glyphosate, though, if I can just run over this quickly, the European Union politicians and the regulators and the researchers and U.S. politicians and corporate representatives, all these guys, all these farmers, activists, they're in a big debate regarding the continued use of glyphosate, which is ubiquitous now. It's well known for its adverse effects on human health and the environment. We won't go into that. Most of the listeners know about that. And more and more governments are trying to move away from glyphosate. The EU executive, which is responsible for licensing glyphosate, has attempted to renew the license up for 15 years. But after 2 meetings in early 2016, they were not able to win enough support from European Union nations. So again, we have a situation where European Union nations are having to buck the Soviet system to protect their people, and for what little will the national governments have of doing so. But this is what I'm getting at. The EU offered then to make a limited extension for 12 to 18 months to allow time for more research and debate, but despite the appearance of compromise, the proposal didn't win the qualified majority that was needed for passage. If the EU is unable to achieve a majority decision, the executive may have to submit the proposal to an appeal committee. It's made up of political representatives of EU member states. If there's no decision made by this committee, the EU Commission will demonstrate its reputation for popular democracy and just adopt its own proposal. But spokesman Bart Stays, member of the European Parliament and Greens Environment and Food Safety spokesperson, commented on the decision. He said, quote, "We applaud those EU governments who are sticking to their guns and refusing to authorize this controversial toxic herbicide. There are clear concerns about the health risks with glyphosate, both as regards it being a carcinogen and an endocrine disruptor. Moreover, glyphosate's devastating impact on biodiversity should have already led to its ban. Thankfully, the significant public mobilization and political opposition to reapproving glyphosate has been taken seriously by key EU governments who have forced the EU Commission to back down. The Commission must stop continuing to try and force through the approval of glyphosate. Such a move would raise major democratic concerns about the EU's decision-making process." So, the EU, once again, demonstrating its lack of concern for any democracy or freedom or health of its citizens. So good for the Brexit. Lots of things have happened in the last 2 weeks. Cameron has resigned. The pig rapist is on his way out. So off to the EU and off to the pig rapists like David Cameron and the imperialists and the warmongers. So again, go to the website, BrandonTurbeville.com, and read the article, the post, A Real New Deal for America, 43 points. And if you're in a country that's not the United States, these points can be easily adapted to fit your country. And you should definitely do that. And if you need help in doing that or something, there are people you can contact. Shoot me an email and tell me what you're working on. I get emails on a regular basis from people telling me what they are working on, and they are having some effect because the ground is fertile for this platform and these points. People are ready. We just need to allow them to put their rage and dissatisfaction to this outlet, and these things can be accomplished. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna be back next week. The hiatus is off. There won't be a rerun next week. There'll be a new show. And tonight, this has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.
This is JJ Inc.